Well, welcome everybody. We're thrilled to have you with us today. My name is David Beatty, and I'm the academic director of the David and Sharon Johnston Center for Corporate Governance Innovation. And we are co-presenting this event today with the Rotman School of Management. For thousands of years, I wish to acknowledge that this land upon which we, the University of Toronto, operates has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are truly grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Sandra Guerra. Sandra is one of the foremost experts on corporate governance globally and dominates the field in Brazil. In fact, she was in Rotman as recently as last June when she was with a group of, I think, 50, Sandra, senior Brazilian managers and executives and board chairs to visit Toronto and Montreal. And then she came back with a second group. The first visit was so, I guess, productive for you. So welcome to us today. Sadly, she has a slight cough, so she might, on occasion, have to drink a sip of water in order to accommodate her coughing. But she has written a book that I think is essential reading and essential knowledge for every director. Sandra, we here at the center have produced for 20 years a board governance index for the top 250 companies in the Canadian Stock Exchange. Those measurement systems, when you look at them, are almost all based on inputs: who came into the boardroom, genders, ethnicity, age, tenure, so on, and outputs: how do they do on compensation? And the inside is invisible to us. And your book is titled The Black Box of Governance, subtitled Boards of Directors Revealed by Those Who Inhabit Them. And I think this as a conceptual notion is vital because I think we've gone well beyond measuring inputs, who gets into the boardroom. And I think we're developing other attributes on the external side, compensation plans and diversity and so on. But what is essential to an effective value adding board is what goes on when those doors are closed. So A, thank you for being with us. B, thank you for having had the insight to write this wonderful book. And maybe I can start just by asking you, how did you get the idea that this was what was needed to drive corporate governance forward in the world?
Thank you so much, David, for the invitation. Thank you for the University of Toronto. It's being a pleasure to be here with you today. And it was a pleasure being in June with you at the university. The book was written because I was very intrigued, David, with why boards would fail throughout the crisis that we face. For instance, in the beginning of the 2000s, the corporate scandals, Enron being the more important one and known one, it triggered, change your regulation, change your best practices, a change of policies. And then we thought, well, okay, now we are safer, right? So if the boards didn't do their role back then, now they may. And then we faced 2008, another important crisis, the global financial crisis. And again, we asked ourselves, what boards were doing that they didn't do the right role, their right role and responsibility. I think that, I've been involved with corporate governance for, 28 years right now. I am one of the founders of the Brazilian Institute of Corporate Governance in Brazil. And in the beginning, it was my understanding is that, when we would be providing training programs, when we would be adapting the policies, when we created a code of best practices, and so on, the market would respond and the governance would be stronger. Of course, there was important progress in our market. I have to acknowledge that. Very important indeed. But nevertheless, we looked at the boards and we didn't have a good answer in terms of why boards would fail. And let me give fails disastrously, not only fail, right?
Right.
So with that in mind, and very upset about all this, I started to research on other elements because if you remember, David, we are together in this governance path for many years. You remember that in the beginning of the governance movement, let's say, a lot of attention was done to the structure of the boards,
Yeah.
number of committees, how the committees work, number of board members, and so on. Of course, there would be uh, there would be proxies that we could see from outside the company, outside the board. But I was really trying to understand, particularly after my thesis at the university, when I studied the role of the boards, that something else would have to be covered. And then I got the behavioral factors involved in the board functioning. So I started to read more authors in regard to board dynamics. Board dynamics, when I started to write the book, was not really literature available. I focused much more on the small groups decision-making dynamics and biases, individual or group bias, but a very important element since the very beginning it was that I wanted to have the inner perspective of the board
Mhm.
because I am a board director for 28 years myself, so I've been in that room. So I know that one thing is what is perceived by stakeholders, right? And another very different thing is what happens in that room. So that's why besides using three different researches uh, with, international, I had three different surveys. One with 304 board members from 40 countries, another one with 100 Brazilian directors, and a final one with 103 Brazilian directors serving in more than 200 boards. On top of that, I had interviews with many board directors. I had around 31 interviews talking about the real life, what really happens in the board. Some of them were iconic uh, corporate governance leaders, such Ira Milson, Adrian Cadbury, Robert Monks, and Mervyn King. And then, of course, I attributed what they say in the book, but the majority remain confidential because I took the cases, so I didn't mention who said what. And
Mhm.
that's why each chapter starts with a caselet, which are based on real life experience. And then I cover the concepts in that chapter. So this inner perceptive understanding of the functioning of the board is for me, it was my main goal on writing this book.
Right. Well, in the beginning, you go through some of the results from earlier research on what makes a difference going into the boardroom. And I rather liked your conclusions with respect to diversity and better performance. This is often a highly disputed topic. Does a more diverse board in the input side, in fact, lead to better decision making on the output side? And I think you're pretty much of the view that the answer to that is a large capital letters yes. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we are talking here about the broad concept of diversity,
Yes.
right? Because when we talk about this broad concept of diversity, I avoid group thinking bias. I avoid, boards to be stuck in the same vision of the world and so on. So you have an environment where you can challenge the ideas. You can challenge perspectives. Of course, this has to come with an environment that is open. So directors would take the risk to disagree. So the psychological comfort that mainly is created by the chair is very important also to get the best of diversity. In one of our research of 2018, with 340 directors from 40 countries, we found a correlation between knowledge or experience diversity and good decision making. Let's summarize like this.
Mhm.
In our research, at that point, we didn't find correlation in regards to other sorts of diversity. But we repeated this research after COVID, after the pandemic,
Yeah.
and we got data from 2021. We didn't treat the data, so I cannot anticipate if there is any change in regards to diversity in our research.
Right. The other thing that your book is very, very impressive about is I would call you a master of metaphor. So when we're in the boardroom, one of the common kind of shibboleths is noses in, fingers out. NIFO, you have a very different metaphor, and that is board members who are sitting in the back seat of the car should not try to drive the car, but let the CEO do the driving. And if you advise the CEO day to day, minute to minute, you're going to end up in a wreck. I absolutely think that's a wonderfully new insight that you sit in the back of the car as a director. Yes?
Yeah, David, and I am a metaphor person. I use metaphors all
Yeah.
the time. And I also, I mean, throughout the years, I was, paying attention on how boards work and the relationship, from boards and with management. And many times when you have, particularly when you have CEOs or executives that are in the board and they are recent in this job of being board directors, they don't have the mindset of a director, and they don't know they didn't realize, I think, how important is to develop another mindset.
Yes.
Most of the time, I realize that they think that because they have a wonderful career as CEO, they are ready to go as board directors, and they don't.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they feel, more inclined to agree with the CEOs because they feel, sympathy with the CEO. I'm not saying that it has to be controversial. No, absolutely. But the idea is that you have to have your mindset as a director,
Yes.
which is different from the executive. So, and that happens, and many times the executive who was until the other day with the hands in the wheel, they started to not providing advice, but really intruding in management, saying,
Mhm.
what's called like this, you do like that, not what, but how to do. And that's the image of, come on, you are in the back seat. If you say turn to the right, you may cause an accident.
Yeah, right. Well, it's interesting because one of the things that we advise people in our directors education programs to do is to get on a not-for-profit board. You have to learn what's different on the other side of the boardroom table. And whether you're managing a large company, a small company, a startup company, it's a very different job to be a value added director on the other side. So I'm always saying get on a not for profit board. If you've never been on a board, get started. Understand that it is a different job.
This is precisely the
Yeah.
same advice I received. I don't know, hundreds of future candidates for board of directors that want advice. And when they have no experience whatsoever, I suggest two things. These to work in a not-for-profit. But I normally say, choose a cause that you are passionate about.
Yes.
Because
Agreed.
this is another thing, David. We have to be passionate about the business that we are in a board. I mean, you really have to like it. You really have to be involved and engaged. It's much more. It's beyond your responsibilities, your fiduciary responsibilities.
Mhm.
So you have to be passionate about. So I normally say, choose a cause that you are passionate about to start. And another thing that I suggest is trying to start in a committee. And let me explain something that is local in Brazil. Around the world, committees are formed by board directors, right? That are members of different committees. In Brazil, it started many years ago to have external, independent people
Ah.
that are not board directors, but they sit in committees. I believe that this happened because our prevailing ownership structure in Brazil, right? We have a dominant controlling environment where you have controllers in the ownership structure. Uh, we have seen a growth in regards to the true corporations in the company, but it's still a small group. So as the directors that sit on boards are connected pretty much with the owners of the company, with the family, or with the parent company, right? You would have, if it's two parent companies that own the business, you would have the VPs of that company sitting in the board, but not in the committees because they don't have time, right? And normally they sit in many, many boards, so they don't have time. So you have the VP in the board and you have a director sitting in the committees. And then, of course, because of the mix of competencies in the board, not every time you have the competencies to be in the audit committee, the people committee, compensation committee, and then it created this new norm in Brazil that that it would be feasible to have other that non-directors but independent experts in the committees, which I think that it could be a solution for certain situations, but it has, of course, implications because you don't have, this person is not really having the whole picture of the company, of course, not necessarily linked to the bottom line of the company. And of course, this knowledge that is developing within the committee is not brought entirely to the board because this person would not participate in the board meetings. But it was a local solution to some challenges related to ownership structure.
Right. I'll move forward into the boardroom now.
Good.
And your line that I think is the seminal line in the book, the competencies which are most lacking in boards are really the behavioral competencies. Do you want to give us the next line or two on that? It's how
Yeah.
they behave as directors in that environment that's going to determine how effective they are.
Well, let's consider first, David, that today, what do we have on boards? As the average of the age and background of people sitting in boards today, they are coming from a different perspective of what would be the future. So they develop their careers mostly developing hard skills, right?
Yes.
They went to your university to learn lots of different things to improve themselves technically and hard skills. It was not so common, and I'm talking about 10, 20 years ago. Now today you see much more of that people would be concerned in developing soft skills. And this is crucial because I can be the better expert ever in a specific topic. I know I'm experienced. I've been there. Excellent. I'm excellent in terms of the hard skill regarding to the topic we are discussing. If I don't have the right skill, and let me tell you, for me the top one, I mean, for me, the more important one is to listen, how to listen, understand, and organize active listening. So if I'm not able to listen to you, let's say, for as an example, you don't know anything about the topic. You come from a different background. For you, this is science fiction. But precisely because you are not an expert, you can see things that I can't see anymore. I'm so framed by all the knowledge, all the that I eventually I cannot see the change that it will happen in this precise market or in this precise business model or in the technology or whatever. But you were not attached to anything. For you are a free thinker. And you can say, Sandra, eventually, did you ever thought that this and that? If I am as an expert, I'm not able to welcome your comment, but genuinely, what I mean is not, perform that I'm listening to you, really listen to you and understanding from where are you coming. And then I can add to my wonderful expertise and knowledge a perspective that I never thought about. And this is only one example of soft skills in the board that I would say that, are pretty much still lacking at the boardroom.
So yes, and as a senior executive, possibly over your career, you've become more and more active in terms of directing as opposed to listening. And that works against you pretty dramatically, doesn't it? In order to balance that, then, Sandra, there's going to be others, because I remember the survey you did. What makes a terrible director? One was not listening. Another one was not talking. It was too quiet. A third, as I recall, was not reading your papers in advance. These were all things that have been experienced by the people you polled in terms of their perception of what's not happening in a boardroom that ought to be happening.
Yeah, and no engagement, which comes
No engagement. Yeah.
together with not reading the papers, because if you are really engaged, you really will, pay attention, dedicate yourself, and stuff. Yes, we researched that in one of the research back in 2018, and it comes from the perception of the board directors we surveyed, and it's common. I think that talking too much was really an issue, really an issue. I think that I see, because I visit many boardrooms, not as a director. As a director, I visit only a few of boards, but as a consultant on corporate governance, doing board evaluation and such, I visit many boardrooms. And I feel, because we do board evaluation, and then it comes, the issues of that board. And my perception is that we have awareness. It's increasing the awareness for that. So I see that some directors in more mature boards, let me say, are, paying attention to that and are concerned of not dominating the conversation. But of course, it's a perception. And the issue is not only that you listen. Another soft skill is how do you pose questions? Because some questions are menacing. I mean, you were presenting a threat, not a question.
Yes.
And of course, you put the other person you were talking to, many times the CEO, in a position of defense. So one thing to be learned is how do you propose a question which not, menacing to the one who's gonna. You open the question to say, I understand. First of all, I can say, David, I can see exactly what you mean. I can see the beauty that you are proposing in this acquisition. Please explore to me what the beauty that you see that I'm not seeing. For instance, it would be totally different to say, I think this acquisition is a madness.
Yes. It's your frontal cortex, the filtering mechanism between your emotional amygdala brain and the society, the setting that you're in, that has to be developed as a director. I often would come to a decision, supposing there's one I remember where a CFO was being promoted to the COO. And I didn't think he had the skills, but that was announced by the president and CEO. It's his or her decision. I then, as opposed to asking a question in the setting of the board, this thing filtered it out, said, I'm going to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner with the CEO to ask about this. So it was off site, because just as you suggest, if it's too challenging, it's threatening, and that closes everybody down. So there is an option, I think, as you consider your appropriate behavior in your frontal cortex of saying to yourself, this is too inflammatory actually to be raised now. The decision has been made. I would like to express my concern about that, but I will do it in another environment.
Precisely,
Yeah.
precisely. It makes the whole difference because you create an environment of openness, not an environment of fight. And important to say, conflict is not a linear variable in boards,
Ah,
right? It's not if it's small, good. If it's too much, no. There is a a point in the middle, and it varies totally according to the culture of the precise board. That is optimum. Why is that? Because you have to challenge ideas. So there are conforming boards, right?
mm-hmm.
That everyone thinks the same. Everyone, go fishing. I'm going to talk about something that I know that you like. Go fishing. Live in Toronto. Are engineers. The wife normally go to the country club or whatever. Very similar background.
Mm-hmm.
They think the same, of course, because they see the world through the same lenses.
Right.
So this conformity has to be challenged by diversity and also by an environment that you create in the board where challenging ideas are welcome, are done in a very good manner. I mean, and this is very difficult in our culture in Latin America, David, because we are not as direct. We we fear conflict. It's very common in my
Ah,
environment in Brazil that people would say, "Excuse me, I have another perspective on that." But we say first, "Excuse me," because it's kind of ugly to kind of disagree or have another
mhm.
perspective, not be necessarily polite. But so you have to create this environment where ideas could be challenged in a good way. There is a safe psychological safety.
Yeah.
So you challenge, and for that you have to have a certain level of conflict of ideas. If you
Yeah.
have none, well, no one will see the tsunami coming.
Okay, let me go back to the cultural point because in Canada, we have a lot of joint ventures with other corporations in different cultures and societies. And I think it's absolutely essential that anybody getting onto a joint venture board from a Canadian perspective stop and think first about the cultural components of the society they're joining. So if we're in Brazil, and let's suppose I'm a PhD from MIT, Caltech, Stanford, and I've been running a company for 15 years and I know what I'm doing. If I go into the Brazilian board meeting with that finger pointing and directed, I'm like an improvised explosive device, right? And if you go across the Pacific Ocean to Japan and get on a Japanese boards never deal with conflict. In the boardroom, it's always dealt with the sake after the board meeting. So
Yes.
cultural awareness is essential when you are moving across national boundaries.
And this is very important because we have more and more global companies, big
Right.
companies that
Yeah.
are global companies. So they are trying to attract to the board people from different jurisdictions. And with that, you bring a different, totally, sometimes a clash of culture.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I remember one situation where, first of all, in Brazil, we have more board meetings than abroad.
Okay.
Are we less efficient? Are what are the reasons for that?
Mm-hmm.
We go deeper. I don't know. I really on that topic. I think that eventually there is a middle term. We in Brazil can be more efficient, but sometimes I feel that there are too few board meetings in some companies. I mean, it's very difficult to grasp a business to have a real understanding with, let's say, 4 meetings a year, to say something. But I mean, I witnessed a person coming from abroad to a Brazilian board and being totally outraged with the level of details, the number of meetings, and expressing something that this is, I mean, not necessarily having the better soft skills to deal with this culture, different
Mhm.
culture.
Mhm.
And the majority of the board was from Brazilian. So you were totally right. You have to understand the culture. Sometimes it's the country culture, but sometimes it's the company culture. Sometimes it's the
Oh, that's
owner,
a good point. Yes.
the family culture when
Yeah.
you have, family-owned companies.
Mhm.
I was talking to a chair yesterday, by the way. We are preparing to do a board evaluation, and I learned that they are pretty much relational. Pretty much. I mean, I have to dedicate myself more time to do this project because I cannot apply the methodology as regular. I'm going to have to talk more than one time to one of the board directors with the family, so they can trust me. And then started to talking. This will not come in an interview as I would do in
Mhm.
another company. So it's the culture of that specific company. That specific company that is a family-owned company, by the way.
Yeah, it's kind of the diversity writ large on an international cultural scale. You've got to cope with both to have smooth functioning. Talk about the role of the chair in trying to bring out the benefits of diversity as opposed to suppressing them.
Yeah, I mean the chair. My understanding of the chair is the person that puts the music for everyone to dance.
Aha, another metaphor, the mistress of metaphor.
But this is not only mine. I mean, I took the idea of Sir Adrian Cadbury. Then
Okay,
mentioned
yep, yep.
he mentions the the orchestra thing.
Right.
But the thing is that the chair puts the song that you're gonna dance. Uh, so it's very important. I have a chapter that I dedicate fully to the to the board chair in the book,
Yes.
as you know.
Yep. The other one I remembered from the board chair on the same metaphor that Adrian Cadbury used is Ben Zander, who was the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. And he has a wonderful, wonderful TED talk, this magical about the power of classical music. But at about minute 12, he said, I turned 40 and I suddenly thought for the first time, I'm the only person on the stage who doesn't make a sound. My job is to pull together these incredible gifted people in front of me, 130 of them, into a coherent whole. And I thought to myself, that metaphor of the conductor trying to get the best out of everybody around that boardroom table really is a powerful idea. It's not to be the dominant A-type leader saying, no, we're not going that way, we're going this way. It's to pull the very best out.
It's the opposite of that. It's a facilitator.
Yeah.
The less you notice the board chair, the best he or she is doing their work. You don't notice. It's like
That's right.
you
Yeah.
don't notice the conductor, right? But the music is divine. So he's, putting, but of course, as conductors, we know many divas, many ego-centered conductors in the world.
Right.
And as chairs, the same, that are dominant, that, would not have the same approach. But the chair, for me, is a facilitator that has to imply much more time to do this role,
Yes.
to talk with the other directors before the meeting to assess how are they informed about the topic, how they are confident that we
Mhm.
have all the information needed to decision. Do they need anything else? Do you think that this decision is already mature to this meeting? I know that takes a lot of time. You talk to, directors before the meeting and then with the CEO and even directors after the meeting as well. But this is the thing, and the same chair is the one that would ask for the expert on the topic to be the last one to speak,
Yeah.
because if I was that high caliber expert on topic X, I mean, if I say something, who else will challenge my thinking?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the role of the chair is hugely important. And we have in my firm, in partnership with Tony Almeida from Mediari, we have a training program on soft skills for board directors.
Ah.
Yeah, we are already starting. By the way, today we had four last year, five beginning, the fifth one beginning later a month ago, and today the sixth cohort is starting. And we have been asked continuously in our training programs, okay, I got it. I understand that I need to develop my soft skills. I'll do this, I'll do that. But what can I do with the chair? Because the chair goes in a total different direction.
Yeah.
And the situation here is I have one of the interviews that I had in the book, uh, which is related to a French director who had a very difficult chair. And he was, he scheduled many different meetings throughout the years, throughout the period that he was in the board, to try to present concepts to that chair and to convince the chair to change the behavior. Sometimes and other directors can do the same thing.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think without a good chair, it's impossible to be an effective value added director, period.
It's very difficult.
It's very difficult. Yeah. So lots of soft skills to be acquired. Tell me some more about the other biases you worry about in boardrooms, and because you're such an inventory of how our mind filters matters, you kind of wonder if any decision at all is rational or just a subject of the
Yeah,
collective biases around the boardroom table.
precisely. The rationality is limit. The rationality is bounded, and
Yeah.
including by cognitive factors such as bias.
Yeah.
One thing, for instance, is the excess of confidence. I'm so sure about that acquisition. I'm so convinced
Hmm.
that I cannot see anything else. And it happens all the time, particularly with the ones really expert or that had the most experience in that topic or that industry or company. Another one is the framing effect in the order that things are
Yes.
being presented in the board. You can be captured by a
Hmm.
flow of ideas that after that you change for a second a perspective and you never can be back there. I like pretty much the concept of context, and with that, for instance, timing, because we do take decisions under time pressure all the time. Have you seen
Right.
in the board that
Hmm.
the executives come
Hmm.
and say, guys, you have 3 months to have that decision? Never, right? It's always for tomorrow,
Hmm.
or the opportunity door will close in 2 weeks or whatever. So time pressure is constantly an issue in boards. And there are studies, I like precisely one experiment done by psychology researchers, which is regarding to the Good Samaritan story in the Bible, right?
Hmm.
And they ask for the professors ask for the group to make a seminar on this topic, the Good Samaritan, right? And they divide them in two groups. In one group, they say, your seminar will be in the other building, not this one. You go there and you start to presented your seminar. Okay. To the other group, they say it will be in the other building, and you pay attention. If you are 1 minute late, will count on your rate. So don't lose any minute. You have to be there. You have to start. Any of you. It's not only one. You never know who will be the first presenting in the seminar. Okay. And these scholars, researchers, put in the patio, in the in the campus, a person who would seem needing help in health, in everything. A poor person sitting in the floor, suffering, really a poor soul. What happened? The first group who didn't have the time pressure, stop there, ask, talk to the person, try to help, try to give some money or whatever. The second group even walked over the guy. Not only didn't stop or didn't pay attention, but some of them just, cross the place and walk over
Mhm.
the person. So, and it's important to have in mind that they are having the Good Samaritan framing in their head, right? They are
Yeah.
framed in the concept of helping others. And even there, time pressure made what made in this experiment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a wonder in a way that any boards add value to any organization, given the time pressures, given, generally speaking, the lack of specific knowledge, and given the interpersonal challenges we all face in trying to communicate in an effective way that takes into account other perspectives. I mean, it has never been surprising to me that we keep having huge governance failures because it is such a difficult job. Um, so Silicon Valley Bank, Wells Fargo, Adelphia, Health South, the list goes on and on and on and on, and they're continuous. It's not as though the last catastrophe we had was the failure of Lehman Brothers or the failure of Enron. I mean, it keeps happening. Last week we had two banks go down. How did that happen? Where was the risk committee? Where were the directors? What was going on? There's an interesting private equity gentleman in Chicago who wrote a book on governance from the private equity point of view. And his conclusion about publicly traded companies was that most directors accepted a reasonable outcome. So there was not an unreasonable outcome, it was okay. And that excellence is never achieved in a widely held company because the directors just don't really, at the end of the day, have enough commitment to it. Which is kind of a sobering thought for large corporations who perform such important services to us.
That's why I mentioned the engagement and the passion needed. I
The
mean, it's not
passion. Yeah. Not just in the not for profit, but a passion to make the business you're overseeing better. Would that not be true?
exactly.
Yeah.
You need to be driven by that interest of doing better, transforming eventually a company in the board you sit in, and make things always better. So, and why is that? Because you love that business, you are involved with, and
Yeah.
and because of that you're engaged, right?
Yeah.
But I think that this sort of crisis that we are seeing, the excess of confidence could be there, right? The excess
Hmm.
of confidence. The other thing that it happens is, the anchoring effect, uh,
Yes.
which means that, you receive a proposition from management that says, let's buy or let's consider that or that transaction or whatever. There is a range between 10 to 15.
Hmm.
By that moment, your mind is totally framed in 10 to 15. If there is another reality out of that, you are not seeing any longer
Hmm.
because you're framed by the anchoring that was presented by the executives. So there are today and protocols to make uh, to provide safer decisions from noise and from bias. I like very much. I read a lot Professor Daniel Kahneman and his co-authors. And
Hmm.
the last one, the book Noise, presents a protocol of mediating decision, the process, which is very interesting. So you take care of, let's say, the framework of the decision to reduce the possibility that you were captured by noises or bias.
Hmm.
This is interesting, which is the nudge effect, right? When I wrote the book in Portuguese in the beginning, David, I believed that only if you would had only the conscious about bias, group or individual one, this would be pretty much enough. And when I went to the fourth edition and the edition in English that we are talking here today, I realized that this would not be necessary. It will not be sufficient. So I started to research, and I present in this book the nudging element. So you
Yes.
create protocols, you create mechanisms that would, try to prevent you to be captured by uh, noise or biases.
Yes, but that's a particularly challenging type of responsibility for any chair, right? Capture enough of the diversity and enough of the decision making protocols that you can actually come to a decision in a short time with a group of people who don't know much about the subject matter. To me, it always goes back to the chair of the board. And is that person competent to bring together the cohesiveness, potential value add of this disparate group of people who meet 6 times a year and don't know each other?
Precisely,
Yeah,
precisely. And or the board is captured by one element of the proposition.
right. Yeah,
One element is so fantastic that they don't see anything else around that element, which
yeah.
is the halo effect, right?
Yeah. Another book of some interest in terms of governance was published last year by McKinsey, talking about the 6 biases of successful CEOs. And assuming they chose their successful CEOs with some wisdom, and I assume they did, the bias with respect to the board, I thought, had a lot of value in it. The job of the CEO is to help the board help him or her do their job.
Absolutely.
So it puts the emphasis sort of on the executive team, saying, you've got a hugely talented group of people here, and your job is to bring them enough into your picture that they could add value to your decision making. I really thought that was a really profound twist. So it's not just us in the boardroom, it's our relationship outside with the management team and their responsibility to us that will help us come to some value added help to them.
Absolutely. I think it's a pretty much interesting thought. Although I would say that for this to happen, uh, you would need the chair
Yeah,
to
right.
allow the CEO to do this.
Yeah,
Because sometimes the chair simply, do not allow the CEO to have a more proactive role in regards to interaction with the board.
interesting. Huh. We have a couple of specific questions I might
Good.
switch. But firstly, I just reiterate inside the black box of governance is a really, really insightful and valuable tool for anyone. So please pay attention to Sandra's thinking on these matters because it's very deep. Question about E, S, and G, which is the top of most people's agendas today. We'll get beyond what is it, I suppose, to how does a board cope with more stakeholders, more different demands, more output indicators than simply the shareholder?
Well, this is a very challenging topic precisely because it involves lots of beliefs and passion about the topic. So I think that, for many years ago, we are not even paying attention to that. And then the awareness of the topic increased, go to, the pendulum effect. And eventually it went to a place that, really important and stressed. And then the reaction started to say, no, guys, come on. This is not material. This is not a value creation thing. And so let's reconsider. Uh, and I think that boards got stuck with the methodology of indicators on how to measure and how to understand. I think this is natural because, of course, you've been for so many years paying attention to financial indicators, operational indicators,
Mhm.
right? So you learn a lot. You know that investors would prefer ROIC instead of GCSR as an indicator for compensation of executives. So you learn that, and you know the difference between one indicator and another. But now you are learning other indicators, why they are important, and how they play in your business. Is
Yeah.
this your business is really, how many indicators you have to consider in terms of environment and social? What is the one that is more relevant? So I think there is a learning process. And today we have a very passionate and contaminated discussion about that. That I think it's not, it's, I would say that this would be happen anyway because of the hype of the ESG, but it doesn't help. What I believe is that, uh, in this new environment that we live in, with millennials taking over an important role as investors,
Mm-hmm.
women taking a very important role as, the buyers around the world. They respond for the consuming of, it's really important. So you were changing that, and these demographic groups are more aware and they give more importance to those elements.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that it will be difficult for you to create value driven only for the shareholders. Uh, but at the same time, I think that you will not create value in ESG if you don't care about the other E, which is economic.
Very good. Yes.
At my firm, we use the acronyms that I learned from a Brazilian specialist in ESG, which is EESG. Her name is Sonia Favaretto: economic, environment, social, governance. If you don't have the economic element, how can you provide value creation in the other elements? But if you don't take care of the perception of the stakeholders, the importance that your stakeholders give to the environment and social and governance, how are you going to create economic value? Because uh, sometimes this approach that the companies would have protect the company in crisis period. And I think that, the pandemic was a very good example how companies that were the first ones to help the small suppliers because they understand they would die, so they anticipate payments, they do this, they created a relationship with that providers for life. These small companies will never forget that in a time of need, that client,
Mm-hmm.
anticipated money to them. They survive because of that. So this is value creation because, confidence and loyalty,
Yeah.
the one way or another will create value, including economic value, because this provider, for instance, would be eventually happy to provide a service uh, charging less than the competitor because of this relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that you will not be able to create value if you don't consider all this. But I think that the boards are still struggling with the indicators, the understanding, and for me, the discussion is pretty much principles and purpose. Board should be starting this discussion about the purpose of the company.
Right. And you have always an overall responsibility for the welfare of the company, which has never excluded the welfare of your employees, the welfare of your supply chains, the welfare of your communities that you serve, and your suppliers. So I think, in a way, there's an enhanced magnification of the EESG that we haven't had that is new. But historically, I think boards tried to, under the business judgment rule, perform in a way that obviously took account of those matters. Here in Canada, we have perhaps the beginnings of the greatest hotel company the world has ever seen, Four Seasons. And Izzy Sharp, living through the 9/11 crisis when he was chair and CEO, and it was publicly traded, he said, I think this is going to last 6, 9 months, the decline in tourism as a result of this, This is our opportunity to look after our employees so that they will forever be grateful to the company and provide consistent luxury service to every one of our guests. And going forward, as a result of that action, which was looking after non-shareholder interests, it was costing the company a lot of money to nurture its employees during this time frame. But their turnover rates today are 30% versus 60 to 70 in most hotel chains, because there's a tremendous inbuilt loyalty that was an investment decision. It's no different, I think, than having built a new plant. You just invested in your people. So the concept has always been there, but I guess with the new generation coming on, Sandra, there's much more focus on other stakeholders in the boardroom, and
Absolutely.
concerned that a lot of the people in that boardroom are former CEOs, hard bitten, hard driving, unremitting in terms of this or that. So composition of boardrooms today, plus the externalities of those who own the companies, being the younger asset managers, maybe gives rise to this enhanced focus on these matters. I don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree entirely. It's a shift of perspective
Yeah.
that boards have to be aware because to navigate in this new world.
Yeah.
Right. And I have seen some boards bringing new generation to the board, some board members that are younger to bring this perspective.
Yep.
Uh, I don't think this is enough because this person, I know a situation where the person is silent most of the time. He was the person that would bring. He was younger than all the rest of the board, and also he would bring the innovation portion of understanding. And we did a board evaluation in this company, and everybody says, "Well, we don't know what he is contributing. We don't hear him."
Yeah.
And then I had the feedback that I have normally after the board evaluation, and of course, I only say certain things after the person open up to me and give me space to that. Otherwise, I don't. But he was opening. I was asking, how do you perceive your results? What do you think? And he said, well, I would like to know how can I, do different because they're not understanding. And I said to him, you are the only person in this board that knows new technology, new business model. If you don't, bring this on the table, you are menacing the company of not seeing all this. You are the only one that has a contribution on that perspective. When you don't speak, and I know that it's not easy for you to speak because you have, icons in that board. I know, really, gods of the industry and of governance and the really high level people. But you can consider that you have the obligation to bring what they don't have. You are the only one.
Mm-hmm.
And let me see in the next process what he tells me about this experience.
A last question for you on diversity in Brazilian publicly traded companies. Do you have any numbers on numbers of gender diversity, ethnic diversity that you can share with us?
I don't have the last numbers with me, and I'm concerned that I will give you some because recently there were updates on that. But what I can say is that there is an increase, but it's minor.
Yeah. Okay. I think we've lost her.
So 18, 19.
Yep.
So I don't have the precise updated number,
Okay.
but what I can say is that it's very slow, the increase of that.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Well, Sandra, thank you very much. You performed brilliantly, even with your illness. So, our thanks to you for joining us today. And please write the next book. You are talking about exactly the right things we need to know, how to behave more responsibly to greater impact inside the boardroom. Let's move from outside to inside, and you are already there. So please keep going. And for those of you who would like to purchase another book, it's available, and we are happy to help facilitate that acquisition. It's certainly a worthwhile investment to make if you aspire to be a value added director, period. We have another Center for Governance Innovation podcast coming up with Connor Kehoe, who I think Sandra knows very well. And it's going to be on the topic of ESG and where are we in terms of getting to some standard definitions, some common measurements, and some audit potentials. A very difficult topic, Sandra. So thanks again for being with us. Thank you all for joining us today. And I look forward to being with you again. God bless, Sandra, and get better quick.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.